The Last of Us is often regarded as one of the best video games of all time. It received unparalleled critical acclaim upon its release and won an astonishing amount of Game of the Year awards. The Last of Us is developer Naughty Dog's fourth major IP, their other three being Crash Bandicoot, which is my best friend's favorite game series, Jak and Daxter, which I have never played, and Uncharted, which is probably my favorite PlayStation franchise. The Last of Us Part 2 is right around the corner, or at least it was when I started this video, so I decided to go back and replay the first game to get prepared. This is the second time I've played The Last of Us, the first being way back when it was released in 2013. I really liked the game the first time I played it, but I didn't love it. I'm not entirely sure why, to be honest. Maybe I was just not mature enough to fully appreciate the themes, characters, and writing, as I was only a dumb, naive 17-year-old. I'm still dumb and naive, but at least I'm not 17 anymore. So far, my opinions on all of the games I've done retrospectives on my channel have either remained the same or have actually been lessened upon replaying certain games. The Last of Us marks the first time on my channel where I like a game more when playing it again, as I can now say that I don't just really like The Last of Us, I love it. I played through the game on the PS4 Slim with the remastered version of the game 3 times for this video, once on normal difficulty, then normal plus, and finally survivor, which is the very hard mode. This video will not be spoiler free. You have been warned. Two of the major sources of information I found for the game were actually included with the remaster. The first being the commentary tracks for every cutscene in the game done by the creative director Neil Druckmann, along with the game's two leading actors, Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson, who played Joel and Ellie respectively. The second was the making of the game documentary titled Grounded. Both of these are absolutely fascinating to watch and listen to, and if you want to experience them for yourself, I highly recommend it. The Grounded documentary is even on the PlayStation YouTube channel, so you can watch it even if you don't have the game. I also watched a few episodes of the Retro Replay definitive playthrough of The Last of Us. Retro Replay is a YouTube channel run by Nolan North and Troy Baker, where they play through retro games, but they've also done a few playthroughs of games that they've been involved in, like Uncharted 1 and 2 and The Last of Us. Their playthroughs of their games are full of cool nuggets of information on the making of the games, and they often have guests in their videos who have also worked on the games, like Neil Druckmann and Ashley Johnson for the last episode of The Last of Us playthrough. Check out their channel if you're interested in that kind of thing. Work for The Last of Us began after Uncharted 2, with Naughty Dog setting up two development teams. One would work on Uncharted 3 and the other would work on The Last of Us. There were quite a few different story and gameplay concepts that were tried and changed throughout the development of the game. Neil Druckmann toyed with the idea of making Ellie Joel's biological daughter, but decided against it as the relationship wouldn't have anywhere to go, as most fathers would already do anything it took to protect their children in a post-apocalypse scenario. Neil had the idea of removing the infected from the game entirely and just having it be about the human survivors. So the cordyceps fungus didn't turn people into zombies, they just died. The game would just be about how humanity survived after an apocalyptic plague wiped most of us out. But the team quickly decided that the infected were going to be necessary for gameplay purposes, as fighting only human enemies for the whole game was far less interesting. And having the infected hammered home the threat of the fungus in a concrete and visceral way, as opposed to the more cerebral understanding of the threat that the player could only visualize. I mean, I'm sure that people would still be able to appreciate the danger of a global pandemic caused by a virus you couldn't see, and would absolutely treat it with the seriousness it demanded, just like they would in real life. The idea of a fungal plague that turned people into essentially zombies was inspired by a BBC documentary called Planet Earth that Neil had watched. Cordyceps is a very real fungus that exists in nature, although it only affects insects. Thank fucking God for that. The Last of Us looked stunning when it was first released, and with the remastered version enhancing the visuals, there was a time where The Last of Us was actually one of the best looking games on the PS4. We see many different locations and environments in our journey across America, from the dilapidated ruins of major cities like Boston and Pittsburgh during the summer, to hydroelectric dams and university campuses in the fall, to small vacation towns in the winter. And every location in the game is highly detailed, with lots of small touches in the buildings and environments that really ground the location and makes it feel real. The game has a very palpable sense of atmosphere, whether it's tense and unnerving like walking through a ruined building with infected all around you, or even serene and peaceful like walking along a river underneath a destroyed overpass. The Last of Us finds beauty in the wreckage of civilization, and it's all brought to life wonderfully by Naughty Dog's team of talented artists. Naughty Dog actually referenced a book called The World Without Us, which goes into detail on how cities would quickly crumble apart without humans to maintain them, and how nature would reclaim the planet. The art direction is just so fucking strong in this game. The remaster makes the game look even better, with a higher resolution, better lighting, and enhanced character models and textures. It also ups the frame rate from the original 30 to 60 frames per second. There are some occasional dips, but the vast majority of the time the game runs like a dream. Naughty Dog even included an option to cap the frame rate at 30 FPS. I don't know why you would, but it's there. All of the cutscenes were captured using mocap technology, which a lot of games do nowadays. But the animations in The Last of Us still stand out as being above and beyond other games, as Naughty Dog likes to go in and tweak the animations by hand to enhance them. So most of the animations you see in game are a mix between motion capture and hand animation. Naughty Dog doesn't capture facial animations, as they say they get better results when they animate the faces by hand, but they do have a ton of cameras set up on the mocap stage and use the actor's facial performance as reference, essentially recreating their performance by hand. It's an interesting process, but The Last of Us has some of the best facial animations I've ever seen in a game, so it definitely works. There are only a few nitpicks I have with the presentation. There is some pop-in and load-in, but it's very minor, and I only really noticed it when I was riding the horse, as the horse can obviously run faster than the player can. And for a game that's trying to be very grounded in realism, it seems odd to me that some enemy bodies disappear after they die and just leave behind a pool of blood. Sound plays an important role in the game, as the clickers use sound to locate the player. The game's sound design is incredible and a joy to experience. The clickers themselves are the standout in my opinion, as being a very different and distinct sounding video game monster that I would recognize anywhere. The score of The Last of Us was written by Gustavo Santaolalla and is one of my favorite game scores of all time. There's such a sense of sorrow, beauty, danger, and atmosphere throughout the whole score. It's also minimalistic as well, with few tracks featuring more than 3 or 4 instruments. The main theme for the game has become one of the most recognizable pieces of video game music out there, and for good reason. The main theme, which is named after the game, is one of my favorites of the soundtrack, but some other standout tracks for me include The Quarantine Zone, Vanishing Grace, All Gone, The Hour, The Choice, Home, and The Path. Gustavo also did a great job when it came to the various motifs for the soundtrack, as The Last of Us, Vanishing Grace, and The Path have multiple variations that get played at different points in the game. Gustavo didn't write any of the music to any gameplay or cutscenes, as he prefers to work without seeing any footage from the projects he works on. Neil simply gave him an overview of what the story was about and the themes that they were trying to explore. One of the things that I found so incredible about the game, and specifically Neil Druckmann as the creative director, is that Naughty Dog was very open and willing to work with everyone involved in the project as an equal. Neil didn't try and force his actors to conform to his vision of the characters. He let them bring their own experiences and personalities to inform them. Same with the music. Neil let Gustavo do his thing without interfering. Gustavo handed off the music to Naughty Dog, and they decided where and when to play the tracks. If I had to pick one thing that really brings the game together, it would be the music. Graphics, gameplay, acting, sound design, all these things are absolutely important, and I'm not trying to diminish them in any way, but I think that the score to a game can be the difference between a great game and an amazing game. Music is such a big part of a game's identity. I mean, can you imagine Halo 3 without Martin O'Donnell? Or Doom without Mick Gordon? I can't, and I definitely can't imagine The Last of Us without Gustavo Santaolalla. And Naughty Dog obviously agrees with me, as Gustavo did the score for the sequel and is going to do the score for the HBO series as well. Wait, what did you say about Mick Gordon? Oh. Fuck! The Last of Us is set in the near future, after a deadly fungus has infected and spread across the world, decimating Earth's population. Our main protagonists are Joel, who is the main player character, and Ellie, who the player gets to control a couple times throughout the game. The game begins with the player taking control of Joel's daughter, Sarah, on the day of the fungal outbreak. We get a very brief glance at what Joel's life was like before the apocalyptic event through the first cutscene of the game, where he and Sarah share a moment to celebrate his birthday. It's short-lived, however, as Joel is forced to kill his neighbor, who has become infected with the fungus, and flees from their home with Joel's brother Tommy. The trio drive away, trying to figure out a safe place to go. Unfortunately, the city has been overrun by infected, and as they try to make their way through, they get into a car accident. Sarah's leg is injured, and Joel has no choice but to carry her through a city that's coming apart at the seams, as Tommy guards them with a gun. Eventually, Tommy gets separated from Joel and Sarah as he hangs back to try and hold off the infected. Joel manages to carry Sarah out of the city, but is stopped by an armed soldier. The soldier is ordered to kill anyone trying to make it out of the town to try and contain the spread of infection, and opens fire on them. Joel is clipped by a bullet and falls to the ground in pain, dropping Sarah. Tommy catches up to them just in time to kill the soldier before he can execute Joel. Joel is saved, but they quickly realize that Sarah was shot. Joel holds her helplessly in his arms as he watches his daughter die, and that was the opening sequence of The Last of Us. This is one of the best openings to a video game that I have ever played. Not only is it tense, atmospheric, and thrilling, it's also incredibly emotional. I don't think I've ever played a game before or since where I was tearing up within the first 15 minutes of the game. The actual plot of the game takes place 20 years after the start of the game. Joel has now become a smuggler in one of the few surviving cities in America, Boston. He and his business partner Tess had some of their merchandise stolen from them, and they want to get it back. So they track down the guy who stole it, only to find out that he's already sold the goods to an anti-government group known as the Fireflies. Joel and Tess get in contact with the Fireflies to try and recover their merchandise, and Marlene, who is a member of the Fireflies, says they can have all their goods back, so long as they do the Fireflies a favor. This favor is to smuggle Ellie out of Boston and to rendezvous with a group of Fireflies who will take her to a Firefly facility in the south of the US. Joel and Tess quickly discover that the reason Ellie is so important to the Fireflies is because she's immune to the cordyceps infection, and they hope to create a cure from her, thus setting in motion the best apocalyptic road trip in gaming. The relationship between Joel and Ellie is the foundation that the rest of the story stands on. Joel begins the story as someone who is jaded, cynical, and closed off emotionally from the world and people around him, as he's already lost the most important person to him, his daughter, and has had to adapt and survive in a world completely gone to hell. We don't get many details about what transpired in Joel's life in the time between the beginning of the outbreak and where we encounter him at the start of the game, but from what little we do know, Joel has seen things and had to do things to survive that weren't exactly what you would call very nice. Ellie, on the other hand, has lived her entire life in a quarantine zone, which is what the characters call the surviving cities. She's not unaware of the dangers of the world, and isn't naive in the sense that she does realize that this world is unforgiving and she has lost people in her life before meeting Joel. But she also hasn't really seen the real horrors of the apocalypse, as she's led as much of a sheltered life as you possibly could live in the game's world. She's nowhere near as jaded or closed off as Joel, and seeing how they gradually come to care about and understand each other over the course of the game is the most engaging part of the story. Now, I wouldn't call the plot of The Last of Us very original or unique. In fact, I think it's pretty cliché and tropey. I knew exactly what was going to happen to every character we came across as soon as I met them. She dies, he lives, they die, he dies first, and then he kills himself out of guilt, so on and so on. If you've seen any zombie or apocalypse movie, then you've seen all this before. The only part that did surprise me was the ending, which I'll get to later. But here's an important point. Just because something isn't unique or original doesn't mean it's bad. You could write the most unique and original story ever, and it could be horrible because you didn't write it well, or you didn't tell it well, or maybe it just didn't resonate with or make sense to people. The Last of Us is regarded so highly by gamers because even though the story it tells isn't something new, the game tells that story better than anyone else. The writing as a whole is superb. This is one of the best written video games I have ever played. The characters, even the minor ones who are only around for a level or two, have so much depth and nuance that you feel like every single character is a real person. I've played a lot of games in my life, and most of them don't have writing even half as good as this game. I've seen a few people say that The Last of Us is only well written for video game standards, which have admittedly been traditionally lower than the standards of film or literature. I disagree completely. I think that The Last of Us is much better written and acted, for that matter, than a lot of movies I've seen or books I've read. I mean, even the HBO series isn't coming up with a new story for the show. They're adapting the game story. I think these people aren't giving the game the credit it deserves. The acting in the game is bar none some of the best acting ever put in a video game. In fact, many people do consider The Last of Us to be the best acted game ever, and I can certainly see why. Every single member of the cast plays their part perfectly, but I especially want to give props to Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson, who give career-defining performances, and Nolan North. In case you aren't aware, Nolan North is the actor who plays Nathan Drake in the Uncharted series, Naughty Dog's other golden goose. He is also one of the most prolific and celebrated voice actors in the video game industry. The first time I played The Last of Us, I was keeping an ear out for Nolan, as I was sure that Naughty Dog would have him be a part of the game in some capacity. It wasn't until I had finished the game and was sitting through the credits that I found out Nolan had played David, and I was floored. I'm not the only one who was impressed by Nolan though, as Troy has said that David was the first time he had seen Nolan as an actor truly transform into a completely different different person, which is good, as I would hope that Nolan North doesn't have much in common with a cannibal rapist cult leader. Joel and Ellie were written at first a little differently to how they ended up in the game. Joel was going to be much more cold and harsh towards other characters, and Ellie was going to be more timid and reserved. But when the characters were cast, each actor brought their own interpretation of the character to life, and Neil had the wisdom and humility to be able to work with the actors to develop the characters further, and rewrite the script in accordance to what each actor brought to the table. Troy brought a warmth and humanity to Joel that wasn't there at first, and Ashley wanted Ellie to be more proactive and not to stand on the sidelines, as Ellie was much less of an active participant in many situations in the story at first. Naughty Dog only had to audition 2 or 3 people for the role of Ellie. As soon as Ashley walked through the door and started acting, they knew they had found the person for the job. But Joel took a lot longer to cast, with many more people auditioning for the role. When Troy first walked into the room for the audition, the team wasn't very impressed, as Troy didn't really seem at all like what the team had envisioned for Joel. But once Troy started acting, the team knew their search was over. Aside from the story not being very unique, there are a few things about it that I have issues with. These issues are somewhat tied to the gameplay, but I'll mention them here because the reason they bother me is that they damage the immersion of the game a little. Why doesn't Joel have a knife like Ellie does? I do like the shiv system in the game, but the idea that Joel, who survived for 20 years in the zombie apocalypse, doesn't have a reliable knife on him at all times is absurd. Or maybe he does have a knife, because in the torture scene he takes this guy's knife and stabs him with it. So did he just not take it with him after? I mean, it's already kind of dumb that he didn't have one, but after getting one he doesn't take it? Okay. How did Ellie make it past all the bandits on her way to the ranch house? They ambushed Joel and Tommy, but somehow Ellie is able to make it past them without any problem. The worst offender, though, has to be Joel's injury. I really like the sequence of Joel getting injured. The way that your movement is hampered is awesome, and it really makes you feel like Joel is seriously fucked. And it's a very integral part of the narrative. I was wondering how Ellie managed to get Joel to the house we see in the winter part of the game, but in the DLC it's shown that Ellie made a makeshift sled and tied that to the horse to drag Joel behind them. So that's how she managed to get him to the house. We also see that she managed to get some medicine to prevent an infection before getting more medicine from David in the main game. Would Joel have already bled out and died before she could patch him up, or died from severe internal trauma? Yeah, probably, but okay, it's not completely impossible for someone to survive that kind of injury without doctors or a hospital, even though it is highly unlikely. So I've accepted 2 things you've asked me to, that Ellie managed to get Joel to safety and that Joel is somehow still alive. But I will not accept that once Joel wakes up, he fucking starts running around and shooting up people and overpowering guys in a physical fight after coming out of what I'm assuming is some kind of coma. He shouldn't be able to stand, let alone do any of the shit that he does in the winter section. You could have written this in a way to where Joel was already recovering from his wound and was healing, but had to let Ellie go out to hunt on her own because he wasn't strong enough yet. And then once Ellie realizes that David's goons had followed her back, she still could have taken off to protect Joel without him knowing. And then Joel could have realized something was wrong and then gone after Ellie. You could even have limited the player's movement and actions a bit, like making Joel be unable to run because he's in too much pain, or preventing him from physically taking down enemies because he's too weak. But the way it actually happened completely broke the immersion for me and is 100% the worst part of the story. The ending of The Last of Us has been talked about and debated since the game first came out. The first time I finished The Last of Us, I wasn't sure what to make of the ending. I liked it, but I couldn't quite come to grips on all of the thoughts I had about it. But this time around, I love it, and it's one of my favorite game endings ever. I think that it very much wraps up the character arcs for Joel and Ellie in the most believable way it could have. And that's actually something that Neil Druckmann has mentioned. The game originally had a different ending, but by the time they were ready to film it, he felt like it was no longer true to the characters and rewrote it, and I think he made the right call. People have debated whether or not Joel was justified in doing what he did, and if he's a terrible person. There are also theories that the Fireflies were purposefully written to be incompetent, and that even if they did perform the surgery, they wouldn't have been able to manufacture a vaccine, and Ellie would have died for nothing. Whether or not that's the case, which I actually personally believe it is irrelevant to the ending in my opinion. I don't think Joel was thinking anything other than, I'm about to lose another daughter, and I'm not going to let that happen. Was what he did selfish? Definitely. Was it horrible? Yes. Was it the right thing to do? Probably not. But it makes complete sense for Joel to do. And at the end of it all, when Ellie asks him to swear to her that what he told her was the truth, personally I don't think Ellie believes him. but she's decided that having Joel in her life is more important than the truth. It's a bold, dramatic, and real ending for the characters that I fucking love. The Last of Us has three main aspects to the gameplay: combat, stealth, and resource management. Let's start with the combat. Joel has a decent arsenal of firearms he can use to take down enemies in the game. There are 4 sidearms: the 9mm pistol, the revolver, the shorty, which is a pistol shotgun, and the El Diablo, which is a sniper pistol. Then you have the primary weapons, of which there are 5: the hunting rifle, the shotgun, the bow, the flamethrower, and the assault rifle. But the assault rifle is only available during the last mission of the game, so I wouldn't necessarily count it. You also have 3 throwable weapons: the nail bomb, which is basically your traditional grenade, the Molotov, and the smoke bomb. Shooting in the game is purposefully slower and less accurate than your average shooter, as The Last of Us is about survival, meaning you need to make every shot count as there isn't that much ammo to go around, at least on the harder difficulties. On normal difficulty, I never needed to worry about ammo, but on Survivor, you bet your ass I was saving every bullet I could. You can upgrade your guns to improve them, like increasing their ammo capacity, reload speed, and recoil, among other things. To do this, you need to find parts in the world, and then once you've accumulated enough parts, you need to find a weapons bench before you can work on your guns. There's also melee combat as well, either with your fists or any of the various melee weapons you can find in the world, such as baseball bats or steel pipes. Every melee weapon has a certain amount of hits you can do with them before they break and are unusable. The wooden plank, for instance, can only hit enemies 4 times before it breaks, whereas the pipe lasts a lot longer. Certain melee weapons, such as the hand axe or machete, can insta-kill enemies. Otherwise, you need to hit them multiple times depending on how damaged the enemy is. You can also craft a shiv onto a melee weapon, which adds a number of insta-kill hits depending on how upgraded your crafting is. There is a crafting system in the game which allows you to make items like the throwables, health packs, or shivs, which are used to stealth kill enemies or open specific doors. Crafting takes place in real time, so it's a good idea to prepare ahead of time for encounters instead of hastily trying to craft an item you need in the middle of a fight. I like this system as it keeps the tension high. There's a lot of exploration you need to do in the game, as this is the best way to find resources like ammo, parts, and crafting materials. As mentioned before, you can find shiv doors that require a full shiv to open, and once used, the shiv breaks, so it's a trade-off as to whether or not you want to use your shiv on the door to save it for a difficult encounter. On normal, this wasn't an issue as I found plenty of materials to craft shivs, but on Survivor, every shiv was incredibly precious. You also find collectibles such as notes left behind by other survivors that help flesh out the world, as well as training manuals which increase your stats. That's not the only way to increase your stats, however, as you can find special pills that you can use to upgrade Joel. These upgrades include things like more max health and less weapon sway. Stealth is the way you'll want to play the game, however, especially on higher difficulties. Joel can sneak up behind enemies and grab them, then do one of 3 things to them. He can use them as a human shield, he can kill them loudly by shooting them in the head, or he can kill them silently, either by choking them out, which takes a few seconds, leaving you vulnerable to be seen and attacked, or kill them instantly with a shiv if you have one. You can also use the bow to silently kill enemies from afar. On the first 3 difficulties, you have access to listen mode, which allows the player to see through walls so they can tell where the enemies are. But on Survivor and Grounded mode, this is turned off, making stealth encounters much more tricky. There are bottles and bricks lying around the environment that you can throw, either distracting guards or hitting them. The brick can also be used like a melee weapon to kill enemies with. There are 5 different enemy types in the game: humans and 4 different kind of infected. The human enemies are the only enemies that fight you with guns and are very easy to sneak up behind. The 4 infected enemies are the runners, stalkers, clickers, and bloaters. Runners are the most common infected you'll come across, and these guys are more or less just human enemies who don't have guns and they can be strangled like humans. Stalkers only appear twice in the game and are much harder to stealth kill, so I always killed them by shooting them. They will run around and try to hide from the player so they can ambush you. Since there's so few encounters with them in the game, I honestly didn't even realize they were different from the runners until after I beat the game and started working on this video, so they're kind of a non-entity as far as I'm concerned. Clickers are the most recognizable enemy of the game. They are completely blind, so they can't see the player, but they can hear you, so whenever there's clickers around, you need to move very slowly. You can't strangle clickers, so the only way to stealth kill them is to either get a headshot on them with the bow, or use a shiv to silently stab them. If a clicker becomes aware of you and gets too close, they will insta-kill you, so they are a very dangerous enemy. But the most dangerous enemy is the bloater, which is kind of a tank enemy. They do big damage with their spore bombs, and just like the clicker, if they grab you, you're dead. You can't stealthily kill these guys, so you either have to avoid them altogether or kill them with your guns. The combat encounters managed to stay fresh throughout the game thanks to the mix-up between fighting the human bandits and the infected. Unfortunately, the only time you ever fight both types of enemies at the same time is in the DLC. Overall, I think the combat and stealth work pretty well. Neither is groundbreaking, but they do their job properly and are enjoyable. There's only a handful of complaints I have with the gameplay. For a game that's trying to be realistic, it's a bit dumb that we can't loot bodies. Enemies will sometimes drop ammo when killed, but otherwise when they die, all their bullets die with them. Each gun has an ammo cap, which I think is a little dumb, as why the fuck would Joel just leave extra bullets when they're so valuable? I think it would have been cool if we could have stored some extra supplies with Ellie, similar to say how Sheva worked in RE5. Ellie does occasionally give you ammo or a med kit that she finds, but being able to swap supplies with her would have given her something more to do in gameplay. The most annoying part of stealth is that your companions will get in your way. This is super fucking annoying. I am glad that your companions can't blow your cover when in stealth, but it is really weird seeing them run around in clear view of enemies and not be spotted or heard. I don't know what Naughty Dog could have done instead of this except for getting them to stay back until you've either cleared the area of enemies or get spotted, but hopefully they came up with a better solution that doesn't break the immersion in part 2. If Joel grabs an enemy from behind when there's no more enemies around, he'll slam them to the ground and kill them instantly. But if he gets spotted while choking an enemy, he'll just stand there and get shot. It would have been cool to be able to quickly kill the enemy if you get spotted, which is what the Arkham games let you do. None of these nitpicks ruin the game at all, but they are worth mentioning here. The Last of Us had a multiplayer portion when it was first released, and it's actually included with the remaster. I did play the multiplayer a little back in the day, and jumping back into it was fun for a couple hours. The multiplayer has a bit of a unique spin to it. You are part of a group of survivors and you need to find resources while in multiplayer games to bring back to your group to keep your members alive. It's a cool meta game, but ultimately it doesn't really add much to the mode. The multiplayer plays basically identically to the main game, kind of like the Uncharted multiplayer. You can still stealth, shoot, and punch your way through the other team and pick up extra resources to help you. It was never going to be a massive hit, but I appreciate that they brought it back for the remaster. What I don't appreciate though is that there are microtransactions for the multiplayer in a remaster of a game. I've bought this game twice now on 2 different consoles, and that's still not enough for you, Sony? Go fuck yourself. But Naughty Dog does like to include a plethora of extra content in their games, like the aforementioned grounded documentary and developer commentary. They also have lots of bonus unlockables like concept art and character skins. You need to buy these unlocks with in-game cash you get for earning tags, which are earned by completing various challenges in-game, such as killing a certain number of enemies in specific ways. I think that we should always applaud developers that put in this type of extra content, as too often nowadays publishers would rather try to nickel and dime us for this type of stuff. Left behind is the single-player DLC for The Last of Us and sees us taking control of Ellie. Half the DLC takes place in the interim between the fall and winter parts of the main story and sees Ellie looking for some medicine for Joel in an abandoned mall. The other half are flashback sequences that happen before the start of the main game and show how Ellie and her friend Riley got bit by the infected, also in an abandoned mall. The DLC is only 2 to 3 hours long, but it's enjoyable for what it is. Seeing Ellie and Riley interact with each other as just 2 kids without having to worry about surviving sheds a new light on Ellie's character. Basically, the structure is we play for a bit as Ellie in present time, where there's enemies around and actual danger, then we switch back to playing as flashback Ellie, where there's no danger at all until the end of the flashback. The DLC is heavily story focused, and I honestly found some parts to be a little bit boring, and this is coming from someone who loves story and narrative focused games. The DLC does add one pretty damn cool mechanic to the game though. There's a couple parts where there are human and infected enemies at the same time, and you can make the infected fight the humans, resulting in some pretty entertaining encounters where you can come in and finish off whoever's left. I really hope we get something like this in the sequel. The only nitpick I have in the DLC is that Ellie only takes her pistol with her when exploring the mall. Joel is currently unconscious and won't be needing his weapons anytime soon, so the fact that Ellie doesn't take one of his guns seems a little bit dumb, especially since she finds a bow a little while into the DLC, a bow that she could have just taken from Joel. The DLC is already so short that not starting us off with another weapon seems kind of pointless. I think it could have been an interesting idea to let us choose one of Joel's main weapons to take with us at the start of the DLC, like the shotgun, hunting rifle, or bow. The Last of Us is an incredible game, which tells one of the best stories in gaming. It's no surprise to me that it received all the accolades it did and has earned its place in gaming history. After playing it again all these years later, I can safely say that it's earned its place as one of my favorite games. I don't know if it would make the top 10, but it would definitely get an honorable mention. I'm gonna give The Last of Us a 9.5 out of 10. I can't wait for The Last of Us Part 2. If you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving a like, subscribing, and commenting your thoughts on The Last of Us. Thanks for watching.